Hi, everybody. I am Catherine Taylor with the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. I am the Associate Counsel here. Wanted to take a couple of minutes today to go over some of the updates that we have made to our forms library and cover some questions that we've received about existing forms. For your reference, my contact information is on the screen in front of you. Certainly feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have related to forms. I am the staff person who works with our forms committee. So if you have any questions about specific forms or suggestions for new forms, we're always happy to receive that information. So definitely feel free to reach out to me at the contact information on your screen. And I just wanted to give a little bit of background as far as how our forms library operates and how those updates are processed. So there are a couple of different ways that suggestions might come to us with regard to new forms that we should introduce or changes that should be made to existing forms, or sometimes even suggestions about removing forms from our library that may not be relevant to our members' use anymore. So oftentimes we get recommendations from individual members. Sometimes the staff will note a issue that should be either corrected or to add to the library based on questions we receive oftentimes the legal hotline say, hey, maybe it makes sense to introduce a form related to this topic because we're getting a lot of questions about it. We also have some situations where there might be a change to the law that would require us to update our forms to make sure that they're in compliance with the current statutory regulations. And then, of course, anytime there's any suggestion related to our forms library, it goes in front of our Form Content Advisory Committee. The committee meets approximately quarterly. So usually, there's a handful of forms or suggestions that are reviewed each quarter by the committee. And, of course, committee members can also bring forward their own suggestions as well. Once those changes are approved by the committee, they then go to our forms designer. And then once they've been fully integrated, they're then dispersed to all of the platforms that our forms are offered through, which is growing every day. It's currently through Lone Wolf, which covers ZipForm Plus, as well as Transaction Desk. We've got DocuSign and Dotloop, as well as Form Simplicity. We also have Remind Docs Plus that will be made available at the end of this year. We also have SkySlope. So those are all the places our forms are currently offered. Certainly, some brokerages use different platforms. If you'd like to have a licensing agreement to have your forms available through whatever platform you have, again, certainly feel free to reach out to me and we can discuss what your needs are. So what are the new forms that we've introduced this year in 2021? Our forms committee has been very busy, largely responding to the marketplace that we're operating in currently. There's a huge demand, not a lot of inventory. It's leading to, a lot of atypical scenarios out there in the field for our members. And we want to be responsive to make sure that we're making forms available that help make your businesses more productive while also protecting you from potential risks. One of the largest risks that our members are going to face if there are gaps in our forms library is potentially the unauthorized practice of law. We don't want you guys creating your own forms without the assistance of attorneys and potentially getting yourself into trouble. So over the past year, we have introduced a seller to find suitable housing addendum, seller instructions regarding buyer letters, fair housing considerations regarding buyer letters, a waiver of inspection rights addendum, and a sight unseen addendum. And I'm going to go through each of these independently as well. So the seller to find suitable housing addendum was added in the spring. And obviously when we've got reduced inventory out there, sellers are fearful of not being able to find replacement housing. So we had heard from a number of members saying this is something that would be really helpful in their business. So this is an addendum that can be added to either a contract to purchase or a purchase and sales agreement. Now, this is a material term, so if you have a seller that you're working with, it makes sense to have this be part of the original contract, whether that's a contract to purchase or a purchase and sale agreement. Throughout the state, we do have pockets that go straight to purchase and sale agreements, so it does work in those situations as well. But if you're operating with the two-step process, try to include this with your contract to purchase, so you're not trying to renegotiate material terms when you're going to purchase and sales. And what this addendum does, it provides the seller the right to terminate the contract if they're unable to find suitable housing. And the form dictates that suitable housing may either be a purchase or a lease for replacement housing, and it's at the seller's sole discretion. So the seller then is simply obligated, if they're unable to find suitable housing, to provide notice by a certain date at 5 p.m. And if they don't provide notice by that time, this contingency is deemed waived. It also has a section that allows for the parties to include additional agreed upon terms. So what might a buyer and seller additionally agree to? There's a whole realm of possibilities here. One of the things that I've heard that people like to include here is a language related to an automatic extension for a period of time that says, okay, well, seller hasn't found suitable housing by X date. If that's the case and they provide notice, and they're entitled to one 30-day extension. For example, anything additional, of course, needs to be agreed upon by both parties. And then this addendum would, of course, be signed by both parties in order to be binding. The next form we developed, and this goes hand in hand, Form 525 is seller instructions regarding buyer letters. We also have the sister form, which is for being provided to buyers to educate them regarding these personal letters. Fair housing has been at the forefront of our mind for the last year. There's been a lot of attention paid to fair housing, and we want to make sure that our members are equipped to be educated themselves and to also educate their clients as far as what is fair housing, how does it apply to a transaction, and how do you protect yourselves from potentially becoming subject to a fair housing complaint. So what this form provides for is it identifies the parties to the contract. It's going to be the sellers to the property as well as the broker, and it identifies the specific property that's being sold. It's included as a header on the document itself. And then it gives a little bit of background as far as what fair housing is and why these buyer letters are potentially problematic, and it identifies all of the protected classes in Massachusetts. Here in Massachusetts, our list of protected classes is more extensive than what the federal fair housing laws require. So we're much more protective of individuals here. So there's more categories that sellers and their brokers need to be aware of. It also includes a strong recommendation from the listing broker as well as the Massachusetts Association of Realtors that sellers not accept these personal letters due to the fair housing concerns that they could potentially raise. And if the seller is in agreement with not accepting these types of letters, it then goes on to instruct their broker to not accept the letters, to not present the letters, and to place an instruction in the multiple listing service to that extent that says, seller will not review personal letters from buyer. So then if the listing broker does receive a letter, they can turn around to that buyer broker and say, as per the instruction included in the MLS, my seller's not reviewing this letter. You can even go so far as to ask them to submit a clean offer that does not include it. You really want to have your hands off of these as much as possible. So this is what the form looks like. As you'll see, the recommendation from the association and the listing broker is in bold. And this, of course, would be signed and dated by the seller. The best time to present this to your seller clients would be when you're signing your listing agreement, and then you can incorporate it as part of that whole listing package. And then you have it from the get-go, and you're not addressing this potential scenario when it arises. You have that conversation from the very beginning of your relationship with the seller. Now, our exclusive right to sell contract listing agreement has always included language that says the seller is going to abide by all fair housing rules. This just takes that one step farther and explains what their obligations are. These letters oftentimes contain many personal identifying characteristics that place them into one or more protected classes, which if a seller knows, they could even inadvertently use that information in making their determination, and that could potentially subject them to a fair housing claim. And that's what we want to avoid. So this, what I call a sister form, is the Fair Housing Considerations Regarding Buyer Letters, Form 524. And that is the form that is provided by the realtor to their buyer clients. Again, it educates their clients about fair housing. It identifies all of the protected classes that we have here in Massachusetts. It highlights the broker's commitment to providing professional services to all individuals. So that, brings forward your commitment, your dedication, and your professionalism as a realtor, and says, this is how I'm going to work for you. This is how I'm going to benefit you. This is how I'm going to put forward, your best offer possible. You don't need a personal letter to be successful. And then it also informs the buyer that the agent is not going to assist in the preparation or the passing of these letters. So you want to remove yourself from these situations. So if you have a buyer who's interested in submitting a letter of this nature, you don't want to be reviewing that letter, providing them a template, anything along those lines. You really want to be hands off of these types of letters to help protect you and your agents related to fair housing in these situations. The next form we added to our library is a waiver of inspection rights addendum. This is for those situations where a buyer has chosen to waive their home inspection contingency in an attempt to make their offer more competitive. This has been a hot topic of conversation over the last several months. And we wanted to provide our members with something that underscores the importance of home inspections, reminds buyers of what their options are with regard to home inspections, and highlights the fact that a waiver of an inspection is the buyer's decision, and it's not their realtor telling them you need to waive a home inspection. It is the buyer making an educated decision. So this form has been developed to help educate and remind the buyer of what options are available to them. And it specifically states that the buyer is the one who is making the determination after receiving this information that they are going to waive their right to a home inspection. And it goes further to highlight that the buyer is acknowledging that they're assuming the risk of the waiver of home inspection, and as a result are waiving any claims they might have against that broker associated with not conducting the home inspection. And that's going to include, as the MAR contract to purchase includes, it's not just a standard home inspection, but it also includes the pest and the radon and water quality, any type of inspection that the buyer may potentially want to pursue. They are waiving by using this form. Now, if your buyer is waiving their home inspection, you want to make sure that you redact that entire paragraph from the contract to purchase to make it clear what it means, what the buyer is actually looking to accomplish in that situation. And of course, that would be signed and dated by the buyer as well. The next form is the sight unseen addendum. This is form number 522. And this is for those situations where a buyer might be purchasing a property without having physically seen the property. So they may be making a determination based solely off of the listing information, or they might have done a video walkthrough or a virtual tour or something of the property, but they haven't physically been there. So this form is developed to help protect our members, of course, in those situations where a buyer is submitting an offer on a property they have not stepped foot in. And it advises them that there are going to be aspects of that property that are likely going to be different when they view it in person from what they're able to determine based on the photographs or videos of the property and what they expected. Now, this form is a little bit more comprehensive in the waiver of claims that they might have. It's not only releasing their broker, the buyer broker, but it's also going to be releasing the listing broker and the seller from any claims that might arise out of a condition that would have been apparent if they had seen the property in person. So we included it in that fashion because there maybe sellers who are less inclined to accept an offer, even if it's a strong offer, from a person who hasn't seen the property in person, because there are certain risks associated with that. And sellers may be hesitant to move forward with a buyer who may be unhappy with their decision when they ultimately see it. So to hopefully strengthen that buyer's offer on a sight unseen and help alleviate some of those concerns of the listing broker and the seller, that is the waiver that has been included there. Finally, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to discuss some changes that were recently made to the contract to purchase, form number 501. Obviously, this is not a new form that's been added to our library, but there was an amendment made to the form that includes a disclosure of the agent's relationship to the buyer. So the agent who is completing the offer form on behalf of the buyer, we included that. So what I've done is I've created a little bit of a template here to help understand how to appropriately fill out that top portion of the contract to purchase. So the from and to section hasn't changed at all. That has remained the same. You're identifying the buyers and the owner of record as the seller. You're then going to identify the agent who is completing the offer. That's going to be the agent's name. So let's just use my name, Catherine Taylor. The agent, Catherine Taylor, is operating in this transaction as, who do I represent? So this is similar to the mandatory consumer licensee relationship disclosure, but it does not replace that. That's very important to remember. This is in addition to that. This is to help satisfy standard of practice 16-10 in our Realtor Code of Ethics. So this is identifying who you are. Oftentimes, it's going to be a buyer's agent or dual agent or facilitator. All of those are very common options. There are also some situations where you might check seller. If the buyer is unrepresented and the seller's agent is assisting the buyer with completing the offer form, filling in the blanks, not representing them, not in an agency capacity, so you're not in dual agency, it might be appropriate to check seller's agent in this section, although that's probably the least common scenario here. And then it goes on to state that it doesn't eliminate the requirement to have the mandatory relationship disclosure completed. So please make sure that you are still doing that as well. And then here at the bottom of your screen, it says, to purchase the property described as, you include the property address there. If it is included in the MLS, include, the MLS number, if you have that. And then it says, to which I've been introduced by. And that's been a question we've received a lot too. Who do I put here? Who has done the introducing? That is going to be the agent who brought the buyer to the property and their brokerage. If you can include all of that information there, I know it's not a terribly long line, but you should be identifying at the very least the brokerage, because that's who the commission is due to, and the agent name if possible. And I'm again going to have my contact information here on this screen for you in case you have any questions, comments, or concerns related to anything forms related. Happy to discuss with you, and certainly feel free to reach out at any time. Thank you so much.